You might think there's going to be differences, but a lot of times you'll find one outlier that's just wildly different. And the trouble is knowing this ahead of time.
We need to talk about this topic that always tends to be underrated, so to speak. Yeah, I think
misunderstood to some extent.
Yeah, people just don't really dig into it deep enough to really get the fact that there is a thing called system synergy. And it has to do with, when we mean synergy, the system synergizes with whatever the transducer is that's producing the music, and your room, and your ears, and your music. So
everything, yeah.
It's a complicated topic, which is why it's very confusing as to which way to go with this. But synergy is a combination of things that just happens to come together. When it does come together, it's phenomenal.
Well, you notice. You're like, oh.
Yeah, if you walk into somebody's room that has that set up, where they've already spent typically years doing this, refining the system to a point where everything just works, you walk in there and you're bowled over. Like, whoa. I've seen that with speakers and 2-channel systems.
That's hard to do with 2-channel.
It's you got to have the room, you got to have a lot of things in the right places. Yeah, most people don't have that, but the people that have spent the time and money, wow.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we'll talk about as it pertains to headphone systems, and that's a tricky one because what we see commonly is people buy gear that's good, and it could be exceptional. You could buy a headphone, an amplifier, a DAC, whatever, and that could be a great piece of gear. But when you put it together in your system with your other stuff, it's just good and it isn't exceptional. And that's the difficulty. It seems to be you hit a point where your hardware is good enough. The differences that you're talking about are very minor between different things. So if you get something that maybe one particular region is a little better or worse, accentuated or whatever, it doesn't necessarily always mesh up perfectly with another piece of gear that's made by a different company, different brand or whatever. And that's not to say that the same brand always guarantees you get good synergy, but sort of gives you better odds, kind of.
I don't know. Most of the time when I see the same gear, it usually works pretty well together, by the same brand.
At the higher end.
Yeah.
At the higher end, because they tend to have, when you get to the upper echelon of gear, they've weeded out most of the problems with the sound, right?
Well,
so to speak.
They're using all their stuff usually too to develop all the new
that's
things,
true.
So.
That helps a lot.
That's the biggest issue, though. How do you know what to buy if you already have something that you like? You already have an amplifier and you think it's great. You like your headphone. You're looking for a DAC. How do you know which one's going to have good synergy with the rest of your stuff?
Well, there's not like a synergy number on things.
Yeah, that's the impossible task, right?
Like Geranimals. I don't know if you guys remember that Geranimals used to be able to match clothing for kids, like the top and the pants.
No.
I don't know if it was an animal on each tag or something, or a colored animal, but if you match one animal with the other, then that means that those two pieces could go together real well.
Huh.
Maybe we should start. Maybe the audio guys should start doing that. We need like a what would you call it? An audiophiliac number, so to speak.
This is actually kind of possible. And if you have stuff that's very neutral, flat reference, usually it goes together fine if that's the sound signature you're looking for. The trouble is when you have something that's trying to fix a problem, that's where you get these really exaggerated issues with synergy. Sometimes you have amplifiers made for headphones that are a little wacky. They're designed to solve a problem with the headphone, and they do it in an unusual way. And as a result, if you pair this with the wrong headphone, the wrong DAC, amp, or whatever, you could get issues where it sounds different. Where it sounded great with this other headphone, it could sound bad with another headphone. So what seems to be the biggest issue with this is people think that because this system sounds good, that all the pieces in the system are good. That sort of might be the case, but it's not a reliable method. And unfortunately, sometimes it's just the system in its complete configuration that's good. And if you take pieces out and you change stuff, you need to reevaluate.
That's the hardest part with this stuff, when you think about it, is that most people don't have all these different gears in front of them to play with.
Well, if you did, it would be a lot easier, just mix and match.
It'd be nice to have 3 or 4 amps 3 or 4 DACs, 3 or 4 headphones. And then, and that's what dealers are for. And, if you have a local dealer that has this stuff, that's a good learning curve right there. It's a good chunk of the learning curve to be able to take a headphone and plug it into different systems and go, oh, now I see, the same headphone, how it responds and reacts and sounds completely different on each system, which is like, okay, like people have never done that would be like,
well,
what's going on here?
That's potentially misleading. It can sound completely different.
Well, yeah.
Sometimes it sounds practically the same, right? Other times it is totally different.
And then you might want to reconsider the headphone.
Well, it depends on the system you're plugging into, right? Sometimes you get really good systems. You could plug into one, you plug in another, and it sounds very similar. You can't really tell the difference. And this is especially common with DACs, where it's hard to tell sometimes, but other times it isn't. So it kind of, people could think that there is no difference with this thing because I tried 2 of them and they sounded very similar. But it could have been your system at the time. It was limited and it wasn't able to tell you the difference. Or it could have been there really wasn't a lot of difference. But it's shocking because a lot of times if you take a bunch of different amplifiers or headphones or DACs or whatever, the differences are more pronounced than you would expect. You might think there's going to be differences, but a lot of times you'll find one outlier that's just wildly different. And the trouble is knowing this ahead of time, knowing what's going to work and what you want to hear without actually hearing it.
Now, you've really got a wild card with like tube amps then. Because then it's not only the amp, then you're like, oh, this guy's running these tubes that like they haven't made in 80 years and they're like $2,000 a set.
Right.
So, and with tube amps, you could change completely what it sounds like. So that's
Almost,
a whole different thing.
It's almost like you make a one-off tube amp.
Pretty much, yeah.
A, no one else can find these tubes, and if they do, you're spending more than the amp cost to put them in,
Sometimes.
And B, I mean, he set it up for himself. I mean, it may not, that amp, even if you copied what he was doing, may not sound the same in your home, in your environment, if you didn't copy everything exactly. The source, the cabling.
Well, I've seen that before. People are like, I'm just going to get everything he has because I like it. I mean, that's one way to do it.
Right. Yeah. If someone's got it all figured out and you like it, then no more power to you. You're done. But, in fact, that's the simplest way to do it.
It kind of is.
Someone who already figured this out, But then how do you know they're actually right?
Well,
maybe figure it out for themselves.
Well, right, yeah. But I mean, if you listen to it and you like it too, well.
Right. You got to try
solved,
it.
Right?
Yeah. And it's almost, that's the other thing we should talk about. It should be more of a long-term listen if you could do it. 15 minutes doesn't usually cut it. Particularly if you're not familiar with that type of sound, where you've never heard it sound like that before. Like if something's way different than you're accustomed to, you got to give it more time. Your brain isn't used to the acoustic, the sound, whatever.
It could be weeks if you're really not used to it.
It could be. It takes time.
Well,
15 minutes usually.
It helps if you do it all the time. If you're always listening to speakers and headphones, all different kinds, all different places, you kind of get used to doing that. But if you're not doing that all the time.
Yeah, if you have a huge subset of knowledge in your head as to what sounds like what, and you're right. It's easy to go, because you're almost always overlapping signatures at some point, and you kind of already heard how things combine, and that takes a lot of years.
Yeah, you're not going to do that.
You really got to play with shit too. So, and there are people on the forums like HeadFi and stuff in the community who have done that. They've gone through a lot of shit, everything. Yep. Everything that's currently available, they've gone through it.
And they're still going through new stuff, right?
But even then, their tastes are what set the difference between them and you. And if even then, what they like may not be what you like.
And they could listen to a different type of music, and that type of music could prefer a particular exaggeration in the sound signature in a particular region. And it could benefit from more bass.
Or be
less
totally
bass
relaxed in a way that you don't appreciate.
Sure.
Some
people really like that.
You want more of a forward mid-range presence, and this thing's laid back more, or vice versa. And, so everyone's in a different point on it. I always like to use a ladder as an analogy, where everyone's on a different step on a rung of the ladder.
Well, that would indicate you always want to be higher on the ladder, sort of.
Well, I mean, it's a ladder of experience. The ladder stands for experience. It doesn't stand for how much you spent. It's not a money ladder. It's experience, although they tend to go hand in hand.
Could be.
They tend to go hand in hand.
That is a thing. Sometimes you could find combinations of inexpensive gear that work very well. Now, they tend to not actually be that competitive in the high-end space, but if you have very good synergy in a low-cost system, you very much can excel beyond the point of a higher-end system that has bad synergy. That's pretty easy.
Yeah.
So it matters potentially a great deal what gear you choose. The issue is it's very hard to have someone else pick it for you. You could pick systems that are known to have widespread good synergy, and that's obviously a good start. If you're starting out, you don't know anything, asking someone that you trust their opinion, that you think that they would know best. So if you already know something, maybe contact that manufacturer. If you already know you like a headphone or an amp or something, maybe contact them and say, hey, what do you like that goes with this? That's probably a pretty good idea.
Yeah, most of the manufacturers try out other stuff to know what works well with their stuff. So yeah, they probably know.
Well, the other thing too, if you're beginning at this too, at the lower end of things, is that like a company comes to mind is JDS Labs.
Yeah.
They're a U.S. manufacturer. They make lower end stuff. It's $300-400 amp stacks, but they just happen to make everything. They make a deck, they make an amp, and they match each other, kind of like this stuff does, right? But at the low end of things, and the beauty of it is that they can tune the DAC and the amp to go together. And I mean, I know going back from the two-channel speaker world, that's kind of important. People are always mix and matching gear. In headphones, it's even more mix and match than I've ever seen on the planet. And it's history has shown that it's extremely difficult to get two pieces from two different manufacturers to actually be of perfect synergy. Very difficult, very difficult. You'll get close, and you think you are where you should be, and a lot of times maybe you can do better than matching both their pieces from the same manufacturer. Maybe, you know.
Sure,
but
if you try everything.
Yeah, right. But you're almost always better off to go with the same manufacturer for both for all the pieces, you know. And it's to me it's a way, it's the path of least resistance, so to speak. You know, they just. Because they mixed their sounds, or they blended. I mean, these pieces at the lower end aren't perfect. They're always going to sound like they're not really highly refined, but you can make that sound nice. It could be pleasing. It could work with a lot of different gear or headphones, you know, because they were made to work together. So something to consider on gear.
If they're experienced when they're designing, if they really know what they're doing.
Yeah. We're talking about companies that have been around for years. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they usually within the same company, you'd run like the same design philosophies for all your pieces, so that's why they would usually work well together.
True.
Yeah. So,
and usually they design it around what makes sense for people to buy, right? Like in the JDS example, presumably their DAC is designed to work well with their amp,
right?
And well, they have one with an integrated DAC, so
right. Yeah, simple one-piece box.
Yeah, even easier. Yeah, you could just do that too.
Yeah.
Just buy one box that does everything.
Yeah.
You design the whole system to work well, which makes sense. But short of that, I think a good start, if you want to get on the path to learn, is try pieces, but it has to ideally be more like 5+ to really get a good picture. I think, at least for me, if you try two different things, it's kind of hard to say which one's better or worse, because they're kind of better and worse in different ways. And then you're left speculating, well, which one do I care about more? What matters more to me? And then you're concerned about the price point, the style, the aesthetics, and stuff like that. If you have 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces, like if you could manage to do that, and this is a big undertaking.
Sounds confusing.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing.
Then it's usually, it's actually pretty clear a lot of times. So
that's true.
If you're shuffling through a bunch of different pieces, a lot of them is where it's like, well, this is an outlier. I'm not interested in this at all.
Right.
And you could find a couple then that actually excel. And it's easier. It just takes a lot of time.
Yeah, the problem is
Patience.
the number of permutations involved when you start having multiple sources and multiple. They're like, okay, I'm going to use this DAC with this amp. Okay, now I'm going to use this DAC with this other amp. Now I'm going to use this other amp with that DAC.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
you know, because
it's a
I mean, if
lot.
you have 3 of each, right, that's 9 possible combinations. If you have the patience to deal with that, you're right.
Well, the way to sort it out is almost always to find the one thing that you think is your go-to. You kind of sort of can't live without in your system. For most people, that's probably going to be their headphone. Find the headphone that works for you. That's a good start. And then with that, then you're just trying to find a system that works for you with the headphone that you like. But for some people, it might be an amp that they really like, the design or the philosophy, whatever, right? There could be a bunch of different reasons for these things.
Well, and that's particularly important at the higher end of headphones, particularly at the top of the headphone food chain.
Yeah.
It's synergy with the gear is critical.
It is.
Yes.
Well, you need some baseline things to be met. Enough power, right? Usually is the biggest problem. Yeah, right. Like output impedance could be a problem on some things. So, you know, like tube amps and stuff. So there's a lot of bass
Yeah.
things you need to.
Yeah,
You know,
you
get
want some
that-
harmonic structure to the sound. You don't really want an amp that has a million dB of negative feedback where, okay, great, it measures just wonderful. It's got 0.00009% distortion, but it sounds like, I don't know, what would it sound like? It sounds like a chainsaw.
Well,
I don't know
It's not
about-
noisy, it's just that you hear every fart coming out of the muffler.
something like that. It's an interesting way to put it. Yeah.
Right? You know, it's like intimately just too
It could be too much
in your
Yeah,
face,
right.
you know, and
Maybe
it's
a little
just
aggressive
like,
sounding.
and that's what happens is you tend to with a lot of negative feedback, you drop the THD, but you also strip harmonics out a lot too, which is what you're measuring is total harmonic distortion. A lot of times that THD, that little bit of THD, actually helps the amp to sound better with music, not with measurement tones,
Well,
but
you'll
music.
get tube amps. They
Right.
typically have 0.00000%
Yeah,
THD.
not even close.
People like the way they sound. So different taste for different folks.
I think most modern tube amps probably stay around under 1% or so, you know, in the headphone world.
Yeah, but
You
if
know.
you print the specs out, they don't look very good.
No, right.
Doesn't mean the amp doesn't sound good or isn't
Yeah.
enjoyable to listen to.
Yeah. But on like a lower efficiency headphone, a little bit of, if the amp has a little bit of tube noise in it, you're not even going to hear it because the
Oh, yeah,
headphone's low
probably not.
efficiency. So
yeah. No.
that's again, you know, so you're looking at synergy where, you know, like speakers were like that. Remember the horn speakers that a lot of people have horns? They're like 103 dB efficient.
Yeah.
I mean, and in the headphone world, it's kind of similar. When you get above 100, you start to hear all kinds of stupid shit in the system.
Then you
know?
need an amp that's optimized
It's
around low noise.
Yeah.
And 15 milliwatts.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Right.
it doesn't need power. It
Right.
just needs to be really quiet, you know. So yeah, you don't want to mix. You tend to not want to mix high-powered amps with high-efficiency speakers or
Yeah.
headphones. So
Right.
you know, that's another part of it. Again, you know, you should ask questions like that if you got a headphone like that and it's in that league where it's got it needs certain needs. Usually, if you go through a dealer, they're going to tell you that. They say, "Do you have an amp to go with this? Well, what is it?" Oh.
hmm
And you think, oh, it's a great amp. Everyone's thought it's great. It works great with my planers. And then you get this 103 dB efficiency and you plug it in. It's like, eh.
Right.
It's like, oh, that ain't working.
Mm.
So, you know, and then you might blame the headphone. I've heard people blame a headphone for humming. You know,
Mhm.
That's common.
it's not the headphone.
Yeah.
Headphones,
doesn't know
they
how to
don't
hum.
know.
No.
That's right. They can't hum.
Mhm.
Let's tell you that straight up. Headphones don't hum.
Well, technically, some could if they're active. You know,
yeah,
like
I
you know.
guess.
Yeah, if they have a built-in amp, I guess it's possible.
Yeah, but even then, it
pretty
shouldn't-
unlikely.
Yeah, it shouldn't hum, but
Something's
It
telling it
should
to
know
hum.
the words.
yeah.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, right. It's getting the words from somewhere else.
Mhm.
So on that note, we should probably get going because if anyone's made it to this part of this, at the end of this video, congratulations. I hope you're subscribed because you're a diehard.
You win the prize.
Mhm.
Yeah, you win the prize. Yeah.
Congrats.
We haven't quite figured out what that is yet.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. We should have a joke at the end of every video. But
Oh,
yeah. Can you think of one?
oh,
Great.
That's the joke.
It's a good one.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. Thank you.